there's no doubt here among people who are in a position to know that Russia was the prime mover in meddling in our elections.
Meddling campaign carried out by the Russians.
The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation is pursuing at least 3 separate probes relating to alleged Russian hacking of the U.S. presidential election.
The Russian meddling in our election. There's one question that rarely gets asked and answered. Does the United States do the same thing to influence other countries to have a pro-American result?
Meddling in elections, a one-way street?
Do you have any doubt that Russia attempted to interfere in the 2016 elections?
None. The Russians interfered in our election during the 2016 cycle. They did it with purpose, they did it with sophistication, they did it with overwhelming technical efforts, and it was an active measures campaign driven from the top of that government. There is no fuzz on that.
About what took place here, about Russian involvement in efforts to hack information and to have an impact on American democracy. I'm very clear-eyed about what that intelligence report says.
It's clear the Russians interfered. The facts are stubborn things. They did hack into this campaign.
There is no question.
This is not fake news. This is actually what happened to us.
This wasn't simply a TV headline. Investigations by the intelligence community suggested that Russia did interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Our agencies determined that the Russian government personally managed the operation, one of the goals of which was to undermine the public's faith in American democracy.
We cannot allow foreign countries to influence our democracies.
Every American should be alarmed by Russia's attacks on our nation. There is no national security interest more vital to the United States of America than the ability to hold free and fair elections without foreign interference.
But to me, the transcendent issue here is the Russian interference in our election process and what that means to the erosion of the fundamental fabric of our democracy. And that, to me, is a huge deal.
If Russia or anybody else is trying to interfere with our elections, I think it's a horrible thing, and I want to get to the bottom of it, and I want to make sure it will never, ever happen.
If Russia had a heavy hand in the US election, that would definitely be a slap in the face for democracy. But the US is certainly not innocent when it comes to influencing foreign elections.
America is a sovereign nation, and our first priority is always the safety and security of our citizens. We are not here to lecture. We are not here to tell other people how to live, what to do, who to be, or how to worship.
This is what Donald Trump said when starting in office. Let's see what things have actually been like.
Have we always sought to oppose communism? Have we always sought to oppose a theology governing a nation's politics? I mean, what's the common denominator that has guided the United States?
Well, of course, sometimes we assisted, pro-democracy candidates. Sometimes, of course, we assisted sometimes we, of course, assisted, authoritarian-minded and corrupt candidates. It varied from case to case and from situation to situation.
Are our efforts, have they been covert or overt? And if your answer is both, which is more effective?
Well, basically, I find that about 2/3 of these type of things were covert and about 1/3 were overt. And I find that the overt were usually the more effective than the covert in this regard.
Every election in every major strategic territory around the world, the United States, Russia, and most other world powers have a perspective around which candidate they would like to see win and which they wouldn't. Now, the extent to which a government is willing to push that perspective on the electorate of that country is a matter of law. And there are lines that when a foreign power steps over them, they're in breach of international law. There are certainly instances of every major world power, including our own, having overstepped those lines in the last century.
During the electoral process of Ecuador in February 2017, politicians in that country stated concerns similar to those of U.S. public officials. The then president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, assured that the National Electoral Council's webpage fell due to interference by U.S. hackers. The latter caused serious unrest within the population that in turn started to question the result of the election.
Fue hackeado en Estados Unidos, compañeros. Por eso le decía, todo esto es un complot. Lo tenían preparado.
In his Twitter account, Correa stated that the technical issues were part of a plan carried out by the US aiming to cause havoc in the country and undermine the electoral win of Alianza País, the ruling party. Were we meddling in Ecuador's elections the same way Russia meddled in ours? Although US foreign policy has changed tact over the last few years, the US has meddled in many places around the world. Interfering in a country works like a well-oiled machine and is not subject exclusively to presidential oversight. Meddling in the name of promoting democracy is an objective that can be manipulated to justify any whim of any special interest groups. To understand how this can be called promoting democracy, you have to understand the purpose of the National Endowment for Democracy. In 1983, the National Endowment for Democracy was set up to...
The National Endowment for Democracy is, just as we've been told, more than bipartisan. It's a genuine partnership of Republicans and Democrats, of labor and business, conservatives and liberals, and of the executive and legislative branches of government. We must work hard for democracy and freedom, and that means putting our resources, organizations, sweat and dollars behind a long-term program. Well, the hope is now a reality. The National Endowment for Democracy, a private, non-profit corporation funded by the Congress, will be the centerpiece of this effort.
Noted as non-governmental, part of the image and part of the myth. The NED likes to refer to itself as an NGO because this helps to maintain a certain credibility abroad that an official US government agency might not have. But NGO is the wrong category. If the NED gets its funds from the US government, is monitored by government auditors, and must coordinate its activities with the State Department, then in what way is it private? The NED is a governmental organization.
They are rarely, if ever, in strong opposition to the foreign policy of the U.S.
We can build civil societies, strong civil societies in these countries, even when these countries are authoritarian. They will have a much better chance of a stable democratic transition when that time comes, as it inevitably will, because these regimes will not be able to modernize, they cannot reform, and ultimately they will fail.
How many Americans can say for real what the NED actually does? In 1986, Carl Gershman admitted that we should not have to do this kind of work covertly. It would be terrible for democratic groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. We saw that in the 60s, and that's why it has been discontinued. We have not had the capability of doing this, and that's why the endowment was created. Alan Weinstein, who helped draft the legislation establishing the NED, declared in 1991, "A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA." In an excellent study of the folly of the National Endowment for Democracy, Barbara Conry noted in 1993, "The National Endowment for Democracy is a foreign policy loose cannon."
Why don't we see if we have...
And on the other hand, Ron Paul wrote, "The misnamed National Endowment for Democracy is nothing more than a costly program that takes US taxpayer funds to promote favorite politicians and political parties abroad. What the NED does in foreign countries, through its recipient organizations, the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute, would be rightly legal in the United States. The NED injects soft money into the domestic elections of foreign countries in favor of one party or the other. Imagine what a couple of $100,000 will do to assist a politician or political party in a relatively poor country abroad. It is particularly Orwellian to call US manipulation of foreign elections promoting democracy. In Ecuador, Rafael Correa's administration suffered a permanent smear campaign. Carrying it out didn't require discrediting a specific ideology, but rather the ethics of those in public office. In 2015, the NED handed out more than $1 million in Ecuador for communication projects, syndicates, and elections. Research done on this matter by Eric Volt, a Norwegian journalist, mentions several cables published by WikiLeaks. The cables, which were sent from the US Embassy in Quito and the US Consulate in Guayaquil, show how the US government tried to prevent Correa from winning the 2006 elections. The cables also show that the US Embassy approached anti-government media, as well as several NGOs, in order to have civil society work against the possibility of Rafael Correa winning the elections. A few miles off the coast of Florida, the communist government of Cuba will hold elections for a single-chamber parliament, which spells the end of the Castro era. This serves as an excuse for the federal government to provide funds for promoting democracy and regime change, and the NED has played a major role in this. Funding for the NED to promote regime change in Cuba has been the following: $3 million in 2014, $3.6 million in 2015, and $5.84 million in 2016. Funding is clearly rising year by year. Nevertheless, roughly $20 million a year of federal money is channeled through institutions and foundations in other countries for these purposes. Note that this is all money taken directly out of American taxpayers.
We give $20 million to Cuba. Why do we give money to Cuba? You know, Americans can't even go to Cuba. It's off limits. It's a communist country, you know. But we're dumping money over there.
Can civil society groups in Cuba survive without this much-needed U.S. assistance?
However, where does all the money go? Who is using the money American taxpayers provide? Are American contributors financing ghost projects?
La National Endowment for Democracia, la NET, mantiene toda esta situación.
Es quien financia todo esto.
Todo esto. Y yo me pregunto, si ocupan realmente la National Endowment for Democracy, que no sé de dónde saca los miles y millones, porque creo que ya Trump se los quiso tumbar o se los tumbó, no se ocupa de venir dos personas o una persona a sentarse y decirme: dime, Aida, lo que te estamos entregando por Checoslovaquia o por Costa Rica o porque cuando sale de ahí, ¿qué estás haciendo con ese dinero?
En Cuba no hay oposición. En Cuba no hay oposición. Es una forma de lucro para muchos líderes. Eso siempre ha sido decepcionante. Saber la basura de la cual nos hemos estado nutriendo.
Yo me puedo poner hoy, estar yo, estar Manuel Cuesta Morúa, estar Aliaga, estar tal vez Giovanni, Rodiles, en un lugar y todos nos conocemos, pero nos ponemos en Copelia, con la esquina de 23 y L llena de gente, y vamos a pasar por 5 personas más que estamos ahí. O sea, que el liderazgo como tal, que la gente diga, yo conozco a esta gente, sé quién es, sé qué es lo que quiere, no me parece que tengamos.
It's not just a directly government-funded
entity like AID, which is accountable to a degree because it's a government agency. What they did is they created a private NGO, non-governmental organization. So that gives it a step away from oversight, but then they're funded all with U.S. public money, so they steal our money and they give it to an organization that's not accountable to Congress in any way because they're the best of both worlds. They can say, hold on, we're a private organization, you can't question us, but the money all comes from us.
Not only does the NED have a complete lack of financial oversight, one also has to put up with civil actors ignoring their role in the process of democratic change. To top it all off, these dissidents serve as an excuse for the large amount of funding that goes into promoting democracy in Cuba. All this money does little more than fatten the purses of NGOs at home and provide a livelihood for opposition leaders abroad.
Yo tengo una laptop aquí que Luz de Esquivel, la esposa de José Díaz Silva, me la hace llegar, pero que ahí encuentro que hay falsificaciones de varias cantidades de dinero que mandan hacia el país para entregárselo a los activistas por las acciones que realizan. Y ahí pude ver que mi nombre estaba falsificado varias veces con mi firma que no había realizado yo. Todos están preocupados por el dinero. O bueno, no vamos a jugarlo todo, pero bueno, te voy a decir que la gran mayoría, porque no es secreto para nadie, que los líderes viven de eso. Yo digo que a Raúl Castro no le conviene soltar el poder. ¿Por qué no le conviene soltar el poder? Porque vive gracias al poder. Manipula a las personas por el poder. Pero los líderes de la oposición tampoco le conviene que esta dictadura se caiga, porque viven gracias a la dictadura y tienen personas debajo que manipulan también y tienen una ganancia por causa de eso. El día que esto caiga, esos líderes no van a tener esa ganancia, ni van a poder manipular a otras personas para poder mandarlas a la calle y ellos poder adquirir un poder monetario.
Many of these independent candidates have added that they have been sent to different countries in order to receive leadership training and to interfere in the elections, as was also done with the opposition of other countries in Latin America. The National Democratic Institute in Colombia, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Mexico, and the Inter-American Institute for Human Rights in Costa Rica frequently host the training meetings referenced by the dissidents in their testimonies. One can also see this in Argentina. The financial statement of the NED's annual report of 2015 confirms that it granted funds to the ONG, Center for International Private Enterprise. This ONG was the main sponsor of the presidential debate held between Daniel Scioli and the current president, Mauricio Macri. The NED's webpage shows that it provided a CIPE with $99,959 in order to fund the organization Argentina Debates. Another $40,000 were provided for supporting key political players that could exert a high degree of influence in institutional reform, as well as for encouraging the main presidential candidates to participate in debates prior to the elections. The NED handed out a grand total of $1.4 million in order to deal with all these issues. According to a cable published by WikiLeaks, which was signed by the American consul in Argentina, Mike Matera, on September 28, 2006, the US government began to keep track of Mauricio Macri that very same year and gave money to his foundation to secure an electoral win for him. The cable goes on to show that Mauricio Macri held a meeting with this same consul in the US Embassy. In the meeting, Mauricio Macri claimed that his foundation, CREER and CRECER, worked together with the International Republican Institute and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Germany. Mauricio Macri got elected as president with the help of our government. Is spending so much taxpayer money for exporting democracy to other countries even worth it?
There are a lot of organizations involved that they fund, and they continue to do it. And of course, the irony of all this is that most Americans and the people in Congress either don't pay attention and say, well, we got to compete a little bit in this propaganda, even if they hear, well, they get involved in radio propaganda and these different things. They'll go along with this. And besides, democracy is pretty good, and that's America. Americanism and all this, but they're too lackadaisical about it. And of course, in the true sense of the word, democracy is the worst reason for us to exist, let alone be an aggressor to promote democracy. So the whole idea that we're going to forcibly promote democracy on it, it's a farce, and I think more people are getting to realize this.
All of those countries that are in red on this map receive American taxpayer foreign aid. And we send it to countries that many Americans don't even understand why we send it to those countries, and I'm going to address some of those. In other words, we don't separate the countries one at a time and vote up or down on whether they ought to get American money. Because I think if we did that, most of these countries in red wouldn't be seeing any American money. We give $20 million to Cuba. Why do we give money to Cuba? You know, Americans can't even go to Cuba. It's off limits. It's a communist country, you know. But we're dumping money over there. And we even give foreign aid to this massive country over here, Russia, that used to be called the USSR. Why do we do that? We don't need to pay them to hate us. They do it on their own. So it's time we reconsider foreign aid, save American taxpayers, because we have a lot of issues in this country, and we need to start taking care of America before we start sending American money to countries throughout the world.
We can certainly say that meddling in elections has not been a one-way street. We must take a moment to evaluate our actions towards other countries and start seeing them in the same light we have judged the hand of foreign powers in our elections. How would Americans feel if it were proved that Russia did indeed finance Trump's campaign? Would this be viewed as a democratic development? How would Americans feel if the Chinese arrived with millions of dollars to support certain candidates deemed friendly to China? Would this be viewed as a democratic development?
Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
It is time we stopped being Big Brother and became Good Neighbor Sam.